Niger's coup leaders and France are in a standoff. The military wants to cut ties with the former colonial power. President Macron refuses to recognize their takeover. So how might this end? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Folly Thibault. 5 weeks ago, Niger was seen as the West's most stable ally in the Sahel region of Africa. But a coup at the end of July has turned that upside down. Ousted President Mohamed Bazoum is under house arrest. The former colonial power, France, refuses to recognize the military takeover. President Emmanuel Macron insists his ally Bazoum is still the legitimate leader. Demonstrators waving Russian as well as Nigerian flags want to cut links with France, accusing it of exploitation. So how might this end? We'll talk to our guests in just a moment, but first let's hear from Niger and our correspondent Ahmed Idris.
The security forces at this military base on our right are having a difficult time controlling the crowd. An unprecedented number of protesters have besieged the military base here in Escadrille. They want to move in forcefully to confront the French soldiers. An estimated 1,500 French soldiers are thought to be or believed to be inside this camp, and they want them out. One of the main defense and military agreements between Niger and France has expired last night. And so, because of that, they are ramping up pressure on the French to move out. And on the part of the military junta, they also have given directives that they want the French ambassador to Niger, whose deadline to move out of the country has expired about a week ago. They want to evict him out of his residence or out of his embassy, wherever he is, to move out of the country because they said his diplomatic immunity and status and that of his family have been revoked. Now, people here in Niger, including the military junta, feel that the country has not been treated fairly in the imposition of sanctions by the economic community of West African states. Analysts and activists say those sanctions are impacting more on the ordinary people on the streets here in Niger Republic. Remember, Niger is a country that is largely dependent on financial and food aid from the international community. Now, with the suspension of operations of non-governmental organizations, as well as the sanctions imposed by the African Union, the Economic Community of West African States, and other international institutions, things are getting more and more difficult for the ordinary Nigerian. Inflation has also gone through the roof. Ahmed Idris, Al Jazeera for Inside Story in Niamey.
Well, let's take a look at links between France and Niger. France colonized the West African country in 1898 and ruled for more than 60 years. Niger gained its independence in 1960, and despite local hostility, some French troops remain until today. France imports uranium from Niger and is its top export partner. Regional and European leaders have condemned the coup. They say French troops must remain in the fight against rebel groups in the Sahel region. But coup supporters say they are fed up with a former colonial power telling their country what to do. Well, let's bring in our guest now for today's show. Joining us from Paris is Nicolas Normand. He's a former French ambassador to Mali, Senegal, and the Republic of the Congo. From Abuja is Kabir Adamu. He's managing director at Beacon Consultancy, a security risk management consultancy. And joining us from Cape Town is Leonard Mbulle-Nziege. He's a researcher at the Institute for Democracy, Citizenship and Public Policy in Africa at the University of Cape Town. A warm welcome to you all, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us on Inside Story. Ambassador Nicolas Normand in Paris, let me start with you if I can. The people of Niger, not just the junta, wants to cut ties with France. Why is France digging in its heels? Why refuse to comply with the expulsion order for Sylvain Ité?
Well, the answer is simple. France does not recognize the coup leaders as a legal president. You know that despite being detained, despite being under pressure, President Bazoum, the former president, the legal president, the elected president, has not resigned. So France recognizes him as a sole president and does not want to comply with an expulsion order or any order coming from the coup leaders from the junta.
Yeah, well, we had somewhat of a similar situation, Ambassador, in Mali, where there was also a coup there. The French ambassador was recalled by Paris then. What's different between that situation and this one, where some say France is putting its envoy at risk?
It's very different because in Mali, the president did resign. He did sign a letter of resignation. That's not the case at all in Niger. So the situation in Niger is very peculiar, very strange, because there are two presidents, actually, one legal and one de facto president. And we recognize only the legal one. We must also stress that the President Bazoum, the one who is detained, still gets in touch, gets in contact with world leaders, including French president. We must also stress that he was a strong ally of France.
Right. We did indeed hear from President Macron, who said he spoke to President Bazoum on the phone almost every day. But what I wanted to get from you, Ambassador Normand, is find out why France is today willing to put the safety and security of its soldiers who are in Niger at risk, and also of its ambassador at risk, by digging in on this issue.
Well, the French have taken a very firm position, a very firm stance. In my own opinion, it's a lost cause because President Bazoum will not not get power again. He will not be handed power back, you know. So we are on a very inflexible, President Macron is very adamant about that. But finally, we will have to pull out from Niger. The ambassador will finally be expelled because there will be finally a solution to the stalemate, which is the current situation from a political point of view.
Do you think President Macron's close relationship with President Bazoum is what's guiding his decisions and his actions on Niger right now?
Well, you know, President Macron hoped at first that President Bazoum could be restored to power under the pressure, well, because the coup leaders were under the pressure of the sanctions of the Ecowas, the local regional organization. But the coup leaders are also very inflexible. They are very adamant that they are going to keep their power. So it is really a stalemate.
Yeah.
And I think finally the winner will be the coup leaders.
Okay, let's bring in Kabir into the conversation. Kabir, as Ambassador Normand just said there, we are in a stalemate, a standoff, and each side seems to be digging in. How, first of all, do you evaluate the way France has handled this crisis in Niger? And how do you think the Nigerian army, the new leadership, will eventually respond?
Well, it's clearly a stalemate and an escalation of a very delicate situation. It appears to me that France is looking for an excuse, as it were, to use possibly some element of force within Niger. Otherwise, I cannot see how France is endangering a very critical component of its foreign relations, its ambassador, and then the military deployment in Niger. Part of the argument is the interpretation of the agreements that allows France to deploy troops. On the Nigerian side, the junta is they've given Niger a month, which is speculated within the agreement. And then the French side is saying, no, you do not have the legitimacy to issue that ultimatum of 1 month. So it's a very interesting period in international relations. How this plays out may become precedents, as it were, for the interpretation of the sovereignty of states to take certain actions. And the tendency for this to escalate into a bigger issue is extremely high. The video that you've shown with people stationed right outside the embassy, anything could go wrong at that point in time. And I know the ability of...
Yeah, indeed. It is a very tense situation. Leonard, your thoughts about how France has handled this situation in Niger, and also perhaps how the military is handling it right now, the new leadership. They seem to be adamant and at the same time cautious, it would seem, as to what they do next?
Yes, I think France has taken a zero-sum approach so far. However, they're trying to take this approach. Meanwhile, they don't have leverage to pursue that because, as the ambassador stated, they don't legally recognize the military junta in power. However, in practice, they have been controlling affairs for the past month. They've been able to establish relations with regional powers, and despite their suspension from Ecowas and the African Union, they've still been able to maintain control over the extent of the territory, as well as to pursue various political, socioeconomic, and other society-wide engagements.
Kabir doesn't agree with you on that. Kabir.
Yeah, so just to correct the point around their ability that they've been able to establish relations with regional authorities. No, ECOWAS still describes the development as an attempted coup. AU describes the development as an attempted coup. The only element that has remained more or less neutral is the United States. They've called it, they are yet to call it a coup. They sent envoys to Niger. And again, the interpretation of an envoy meeting an illegitimate government, depending on where you stand in international relations, is of course subject to the interpretation on whether that is recognition or not. But it's clear that all the multilateral agencies have not recognized the coup in Niger.
Okay, Ambassador, let me come back to you. All right, Leonard, go ahead and respond, and then I'll come back to the ambassador. Yeah, go ahead.
I didn't say regional authority, regional neighbors. For example, Mali and Burkina Faso have stipulated their support, and they even sent military aid in the form of jets to Niger in the event that there was going to be an ECOWAS regional military force deployed to that country. They haven't gotten a full endorsement, but nevertheless, Guinea's military government has also condemned the sanctions. So I didn't say at a regional institutional level. I've noted that African Union and ECOWAS has suspended them, but nevertheless, they have gotten the endorsement and support from regional neighbors such as Mali and Burkina Faso, which also have military governments.
Yeah, regional neighbors which are also under sanctions because of the coups in those countries, in Mali and Burkina Faso. It's worth pointing out. Ambassador, let me come back to you. And Kabir mentioned the relationship with the U.S. there, and the U.S. not recognizing this as a coup. I'll come back to that in just a moment, because there have been some reports that suggest that there is some tension perhaps between Paris and Washington right now on this issue of Niger. But I wanted to ask you about the question of military intervention. Kabir said that perhaps the French could be looking for an excuse to intervene militarily in Niger. Would France do that, you think, if perhaps ECOWAS was to ask for some sort of intervention? Would France intervene militarily?
Well, the threat of ECOWAS to have a military intervention is not credible. They have not the means to do it, and politically it is not feasible. You know, there will be a crowd preventing them from going forward and so on. So there will be no military intervention by ECOWAS, and neither by ECOWAS nor by France. For France, it's totally ruled out anyway. The problem is not that. The problem is that the French are diplomatically isolated. You mentioned the American stance. The Americans are the most flexible. They have not even recognized that there is a coup. They say it is an effort to interrupt a normal process or to seize power by force. It is an effort to disrupt the constitution. It is at most an attempted coup, but it's not a coup. For France, it is a coup. We are clear about that. But we are the only country within Europe to support the idea of a military intervention by ECOWAS, even if it is not credible. So we have a very hostile stance against Niger, and this is a bit awkward because finally the winner are the coup leaders who can denounce France as a hostile power. So they take advantage of that, you know, because there is a strong anti-French sentiment in Niamey, the capital, and so they capitalize on that. So French give them means to be more anti-French, you know.
Kabir, let me come to you. The ambassador talked there about a possible military intervention by ECOWAS, and they did threaten to intervene, but That seems to have somewhat become more quiet now. Do you think that's likely to happen, an intervention by ECOWAS?
I agree with the ambassador that it's theoretically, I wouldn't use the word impossible, but difficult. Military interventions can have different explanations and manifestations. Now, given the size of Niger and several other issues, including, for instance, the political element that the ambassador spoke about, if you use Nigeria as an example, clearly the president has not gotten the kind of support he would have wanted. But there is a constitutional provision that would allow him to use executive powers if it comes to that. Now, other regional powers, such as Côte d'Ivoire and to an extent Ghana, have also indicated support for such a military intervention. Now, there are several determinants, but I think the most important one that we should not run away from is the domino effect that the heads of states, of ECOWAS member states, seem to be running away from. When you have a situation where someone is protecting his own position, then anything can happen. So I wouldn't use impossible, but it is difficult.
All right. Leonard Mbulle-Nziege, the ambassador, alluded to the fact that the military in Niger, the new leadership there, has been capitalizing on this growing anti-French sentiment there. And we've seen huge protests outside the French embassy, the French military base. It's unclear whether that is reflective, of course, of the wider population, because I imagine that those against the coup would not be able to speak freely about it. How much longer do you think the new military leadership can continue to capitalize on this? Is there a clear plan in place, you think, they have to move the country forward and transition to democracy? Do they have a plan in place?
As you said, the military has done quite a good job in trying to use the anti-French sentiment as a mobilization strategy, as well as to derive political capital and support beyond Niger's borders, as they've seen in Mali and Burkina Faso and beyond, as well as on social media. People have saluted the coup and the fact that they consider it a way of pushing away France from continued influence in the country and some sort of second independence for Niger as a country and the West African region in general. Concerning the way forward, I think that the military junta is trying to buy time. If they expel the ambassador, it situates that, the international influence, which was most adamant to have them return Bazoum the power, wouldn't necessarily have a representative on the ground. And symbolically, that's very important because, as I said, the ambassador is the representative of France's government. And if he's not there, it indicates that there's a way forward in terms of engaging with other international partners such as the US, which have been more pragmatic. And as the ambassador described, they haven't necessarily termed it as a coup. So I think that they're buying time, but then the plan isn't necessarily as clear as one would expect after this amount of time in control of Niger.
Kabir, do you agree with that? They're buying time. And how long do you think they can ride on this anti-French sentiment wave?
It's going to be a battle between the effect of the economic sanction. Of course, they are banking on this local support that they've been able to gather so far. But then at a point, Nigerians will have to choose between supporting them and then, of course, the effect of the sanctions on them. We're already seeing that playing out. The second point is there's a rally now around a short transition period. Just earlier this week, the Nigerian president mooted at the idea of a 9-month transition period. Before then, the Algerians put forward a 6-month transition period, but the junta had indicated a 3-year period. So I think that's what the next step would be, what transition period. And then, of course, the various multilateral partners, the diplomatic bilateral partners would also come in to agree around that, the time period for that transition.
Ambassador Normand, what is the next step as far as France is concerned, Ambassador? If, as you say, reinstating Bazoum is a lost cause, then what happens next? How does France settle this crisis?
Well, it will end up by a France withdrawal. There is no doubt about that. But the problem is that who is the winner in this crisis? The winner are the jihadists. There is a very serious insurgency an Islamist insurgency in this country. The French were there only to assist the Nigerian army to combat, to fight the jihadists.
But
so
what about
will
France's
withdraw,
economic interests, Ambassador, in Niger? It's uranium mining. France needs uranium in its energy needs in Niger. What about that? I mean, isn't that a concern for France, its energy independence?
It's not important for France. We have many other providers. Niger is a small producer of uranium, and the main producers for France, the main providers for France are Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Australia, and Canada. So we don't need Niger and its uranium. We were there only for security interests and to fight terrorism. And you know, the coup leaders are not really interested in fighting the jihadists. They are interested in their personal gains. They took power to enrich themselves, not to improve the situation in terms of security.
Right.
This is not their motive. It's clear. It is clear.
Okay, both Kabir and Leonard seem to disagree with you. Kabir, I'll start with you. The ambassador says France wasn't there for its interests. It's not interested in Niger's uranium, and that it was just there to help the fight against armed groups in the region. What do you respond?
In summary, I mean, it's very important that France recognizes that its post-colonial policies in Africa is failing or has failed. I mean, why are we not seeing the type of reactions in other countries? Why is it that it's only in French former colonies that we're seeing that? So it's absolutely important that France starts from that point of view. Now, speaking about security, about economic interest, the reality on ground is different. It's French companies that are mining the uranium. The agreements are skewed in the favor of France, not in the favor of Niger. And I mean, there's no part of the economy of Niger that you speak about that does not reflect that. Then with regards to security, despite the presence of French troops in Niger and the Sahel, Sahel has emerged as the most terrorist-ravaged part of the world at the moment. So it's very difficult to convince a Nigerian. I mean, as an academic, I can look at the data and look at other considerations. But for the average Nigerian, it's almost impossible to convince him that the French presence there is in his interest. And that is what France needs to deal with. Okay,
Leonard, your response to what the ambassador said.
Yeah, I have to fully disagree. I mean, you look at the post-colonial cooperation accords, the cooperation agreements, and they've stipulated that, you know, France should have preferential access to the various precious minerals, including uranium. And, you know, French companies such as what was formerly known as Areva, I think they're called Orano, have had preferential access and have derived significant benefits and profits as a result of unrivaled competition by carrying out activities in Niger. I'd like to ask the ambassador how France would feel if, for example, the Chinese or, say, the Russians would have access to that uranium. And that's something which, you know, in terms of French, not only foreign policy, but as well as overseas economic diplomacy, it's not an option that they would like to have entertained. So saying that France is only there for security motives, I mean, the security issues in Niger and the Sahel only emerged over the past 10 to 15 years, say 20, and if you want to be extensive. But then France's involvement with respect to uranium extraction has prevailed for almost 60 years. So
let's allow the ambassador to respond. Let's allow the ambassador to respond. Ambassador, a good question that Leonard poses there. How would France feel if the Chinese or the Russians were to get access to the uranium in Niger?
Well, you know, those agreements that were mentioned are fakes. There are no such agreements. There is no preferential access for the French. This is totally wrong. It's a fake agreement. I must stress that fact. And also, if we wanted to keep those uranium mines, we would get along with the junta. We would get along with any government. It's not the case at all. We neglect our possible economical interest in that crisis, given that we stick to principles only. So we were there at the request of the government, the same in Mali and Burkina. If the governments do not want the French to assist them in the fighting against the jihadists, we are going to step down, to withdraw from those countries. But it is already the case in Mali and Burkina Faso. And following the withdrawal of the French, the security situation has deteriorated a lot. There are
Ambassador,
much more,
Ambassador, sorry to interrupt you because we're coming towards the end of the show, but I just wanted to put this question to you. Isn't the reality of the situation today that France is losing its last strategic foothold in this region, in the West Africa Sahel region, where other coups have already, as you mentioned, forced it to withdraw troops elsewhere in Mali and Burkina Faso? Is this a strategic defeat, but also a psychological defeat today for France?
You are right. It is a humiliation because we have not adjusted our position to the changes on the ground. But you know, the loser is not the French because we have no strong interest in the region aside from fighting the terrorists. So the loser are the countries. But as I told you, their interest is not in fighting terrorists. Their interest is for the military, for the coup leaders to seize power for themselves, for their personal gains. This is really a tragedy because the situation is deteriorating because of those selfish interests.
Kabir in Abuja, I'll give you the last word. The ambassador says the loser is not France. What are your thoughts about this and what next in this crisis? How do you see it ending?
The premise of the ambassador's assumption is that African countries are not capable. Now, there is some element of truth in that, but that does not allow the possibility that perhaps at this point in time, African countries are waking up to the reality that they can do better. And I think the next stage, which we hope to see from African leaders, is an investment in human capital to allow for management and control of the resources within Africa. It will take time, but that process has to begin. In terms of the resolution of the crisis, I've mentioned earlier on, there is a rallying around a shorter transition period. And I think that's what the next few days would tell us, depending on how this escalation of the situation between Niger and France goes.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for a very insightful discussion. Thank you, Ambassador Nicolas Normand, Kabir Adamu, Leonard Mbulle-Nziege. Thank you for joining us on Inside Story. And thank you, too, for watching. You can always watch this program again anytime by visiting our website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Of course, you can join the conversation on X, formerly known as Twitter. Our handle is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Folly, Thibault, and the whole team here in Doha, thanks for watching. Bye for now.